Ben Shapiro needed precisely 4 minutes and 17 seconds to make Ilhan Omar rue the day she consented to a forum where empirical truth outweighed narratives of persecution. The special broadcast on CNN had been promoted for weeks as a glimpse into the nation's future, featuring a discussion on legislation and morals that theoretically promised high-quality broadcasting. It pitted Ben Shapiro, the conservative commentator famous for his rapid dismantling of arguments with facts, against Representative Ilhan Omar, the progressive lawmaker recognized for her emotive pleas and identity-focused politics. CNN anticipated a polite exchange, a cerebral sharing of perspectives, and perhaps a few shareable clips that would appease viewers from both political spectrums. However, what actually transpired was a slaughter, a structured and evidence-driven destruction that reduced Omar's talking points to rubble and placed her future in office in grave danger. Omar entered the platform exuding the self-assurance of a figure who had spent years sheltered by a compliant press, guarded by identity politics, and protected from rigorous examination by the liberal hierarchy. She had encountered difficult inquiries previously, yet she had consistently managed to deflect them by alleging racism or Islamophobia, or by utilizing the strategy of claiming victimhood. Her standard arguments were prepared, focusing on personal history, underrepresented groups, and the necessity of prioritizing compassion over hard data. In contrast, Shapiro arrived with a computer, a pile of files, and that faintly entertained look he adopts when he realizes he is about to school someone who urgently requires it. He sported his characteristic yarmulke, a visible signal that her attacks on Jews and Israel were targeting a man who could fight back with both personal conviction and crushing statistics. The moderator, Jake Tapper, appeared anxious, and he had every reason to be as the two participants delivered their introductory remarks. Omar spoke with fervor regarding her path as a refugee, her role in speaking for voiceless populations, and her struggle for fairness and equality. It was an effective address, rehearsed and emotive, intended to pull at heartstrings while securing her position of moral superiority. Then Shapiro took his turn, thanking the Congresswoman for her touching introduction and acknowledging her personal story, but noting that individual accounts are not synonymous with facts. He argued that life experiences do not supersede proof. Emotions do not outrank statistics, and being insulted does not equate to being correct. He proposed examining her actual performance, noting that he had dedicated the past few weeks to gathering her voting records, declarations, financial reports, public utterances, and political stances. Shapiro warned that he had numerous inquiries and intended to speak rapidly because he had a vast amount of data to present, while she had a significant amount of explaining to do. The spectators shifted uncomfortably as Omar's grin faded slightly, and Tapper appeared as though he was already lamenting his decision to moderate this event. What followed evolved into the most viewed political showdown of the decade, not due to its competitiveness, but because it was an absolute and total annihilation supported by the evidence Shapiro had been collecting for years. Shapiro bypassed the pleasantries, projecting a timeline onto the display behind him, tapping his keyboard, and beginning what could only be characterized as a prosecutor's case, presented at the velocity of an auctioneer calling a sale. He suggested beginning with her multiple marriages, noting they were more convoluted than a complex film plot and less plausible than a superhero movie script. Shapiro started by noting that in 2002 she entered a religious union with Ahmed Abdi Salan Hersi, which was not state-recognized, though she referred to him as her spouse, and they had children, representing the American dream. His hands gestured toward the timeline, pointing out that in 2009 she legally wed Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmeh, a situation he described as interesting and statistically impossible to justify innocently. Mr. Elmi arrived in the country on a student visa in 2009 and married her weeks later, a fact that raises suspicion since wedding a citizen is the quickest route to residency. Omar attempted to interject, but Shapiro increased his speed, noting that after wedding Mr. Elmi, she resided at a different address while her children were registered at school using Mr. Elmi's address despite her living with Mr. Hersey. He pointed out she maintained shared bank accounts with Mr. Elmi despite living apart. Then clicked to new financial records showing that in 2014 and 2015, while still wed to Elmi, she filed joint taxes with Hersey. This was not an ambiguous situation, he insisted, as filing joint returns with a person one is not married to constitutes tax fraud, and every return she signed was under penalty of perjury. He declared she had signed at least 2 fraudulent returns amounting to 2 felonies, as he displayed immigration papers on the screen with the data reflecting in his lenses. In 2017, she divorced Elmi, and the following year legally wed Hersey, the very man she had been cohabitating with and filing fraudulent taxes with while legally bound to another. All these events led to grave public inquiries regarding whether Elmi is actually her brother, a claim widely investigated, yet she has consistently declined a DNA test that would settle the matter. He asked why she would not simply take the test to stop the rumors, unless the rumors were completely true, turning to face her while leaning on the podium. Shapiro explained the statistical probability of the visa timing, addresses, tax forms, school records, and bank accounts being a mere coincidence was roughly 0.1%, and even that was a generous calculation. He remarked she would have a better chance of winning the lottery while being struck by lightning, asserting these were not mistakes, but a calculated scheme of deception. Omar's complexion reddened visibly as she clutched the podium, retorting that these were racist conspiracy theories pushed by right-wing radicals to invalidate her position in Congress. Shapiro instantly raised a hand to stop her, stating that facts are not racist, documents are not racist, and her own signatures on federal paperwork are not racist. He continued that mathematics is not racist. Bank records showing joint accounts with Elmi while living apart are not racist, and immigration files showing visa dates are not racist. Tax returns signed jointly with Hersey while married to Elmi are not racist, but rather evidence of federal crimes, he added, leaning in and speaking with percussive speed. What is actually prejudiced is the presumption that she should be excused from potential crimes due to her background, as the concept of equal justice implies everyone answers for their actions. He told her she is not unique, not exempt, and not a victim, but a public servant who must explain why her records suggest a combination of immigration fraud, tax fraud, and perjury. Omar attempted to recover, claiming the rumors about her brother had been thoroughly debunked by multiple outlets, to which Shapiro immediately asked by whom. He interrupted before she could finish, noting it was not debunked by a DNA test, nor by documentation disproving the family link, nor by any explanation for the separate addresses and false tax filings. She had merely declared it debunked while withholding the specific evidence that would actually prove it, which is not how facts or proof operate. One cannot simply utter the word debunked and expect physical proof to disappear. And regardless of the brother allegation, it is known she married Elmi weeks after his arrival. We know she lived apart. Her children used his address. They shared accounts, and she filed false taxes, all of which are documented facts, pointing to federal offenses. He asked if she was the unluckiest individual in political history with a suspicious pattern of coincidences, or if she committed fraud and perjury, demanding to know which it was. The chamber fell into a profound silence as Omar looked to Tapper for assistance. But the moderator was studying his notes as if searching for an exit strategy for them both. Shapiro allowed Omar no time to recuperate, displaying a massive spreadsheet filled with columns of figures and calculations that caused the audience's eyes to widen. He announced he would discuss her daughter's consulting firm, then corrected himself to say he would discuss her family's money laundering scheme masquerading as a consulting business. He promised to present this as a math problem, pointing to the data from the Federal Election Commission showing her campaign paid the E Street Group $2.7 million between 2018 and 2020. Noting that the E Street Group is managed by Tim Minott, who is now her husband, Shapiro clicked to a new slide to establish the market rates for the services provided. He stated he had contacted 10 political firms to get quotes for similar digital strategy and mailer services, determining the market rate to be approximately $5,000 to $10,000 per cycle. She had paid between $75,000 and $150,000 per cycle, which is 15 times the standard rate, as he began calculating the figures in red on the screen. Over the relevant period, the fair market value was roughly $300,000, yet the amount paid was $2.7 million, resulting in an excess payment of $2.4 million. This was not a minor accounting discrepancy or a fee for high quality, but rather the conversion of campaign donations into personal family income by drastically overpaying for services. Shapiro displayed comparison data showing that other Congress members in similar districts paid an average of $180,000 for comparable work during the same time frame. He emphasized that she paid nearly $3 million, 15 times what her colleagues spent, and the only justifying variable was that the funds went to someone personally linked to her. Accelerating his pace, he highlighted the timeline, noting the first payment occurred in April 2018, followed by a photo of her and Mr. Minott together in June, while both were married to others. By September 2019, both had filed for divorce, and between October 2019 and March 2020, payments to the group exploded to over $600,000 in just 6 months. In November 2020, she married Mr. Minott, prompting Shapiro to look at her with mock intrigue, noting payments began with the relationship and increased as it developed. This resulted in over $2 million paid above market rates to her eventual husband, which is not consulting but rather the conversion of funds for personal gain through romance. He cited FEC complaints regarding these payments, explaining that while one cannot use donor money for personal use, overpaying a partner by millions creates the exact same functional result. Shapiro recapped the math for the audience, stating the $2.4 million overpayment effectively converted campaign funds to personal benefit, violating federal election laws. Omar tried to defend herself by claiming the FEC reviewed the payments, but Shapiro interrupted to say they approved the vendor, not the rate of 15 times market value. He insisted this was fraud exploiting a loophole, and while technically legal, it was unethical to enrich a partner with donor money, specifically the donations of working-class people. Shapiro noted that if a Republican had done this, she would demand prosecution, but she views her own corruption as acceptable, despite the mathematical proof of her enriching her family. His expression turned colder as he moved to his preferred topic, her views on Jews and Israel, noting that as a pro-Israel Jew, he notices her anti-Semitic patterns. He pulled up a chronological archive of her tweets to demonstrate the development of her bigotry, starting with a 2012 post claiming Israel had hypnotized the world. Shapiro analyzed the phrase as classical anti-Semitic imagery regarding Jewish mind control, a centuries-old trope she applied to the only Jewish state in the world. He clicked to a 2019 tweet where she claimed political support was all about the money, invoking another trope about Jews using wealth to control politics. Although she issued a vague apology when confronted by her own party, he argued she knew exactly what she was doing, comparing Israel to terrorist groups while ignoring actual human rights abusers like China or Iran. He pointed out she reserves her harshest rhetoric for the Jewish state, voting against the Iron Dome defensive system which saves civilians from rockets without harming anyone. He questioned her reason for opposing a system that preserves life unless she wished for those specific civilians to die. Clicking through her voting record rapidly, she voted against condemning the BDS movement, which seeks Israel's elimination, opposed designating groups targeting Jews as terrorists, and supported UN resolutions condemning Israel. Shapiro displayed ADL data showing a 23% spike in anti-Semitic incidents following her tweets, asserting her rhetoric directly correlates with violence against Jewish Americans. He accused her of invoking mind control and money manipulation tropes, minimizing terrorism, and comparing Israel to the Taliban while hiding behind the defense of policy criticism. Shapiro shouted that she could criticize policy all she wanted, but claiming Jews hypnotize the world is a blood libel, not a critique of government action. He stated that her party leadership rebuked her, yet she never changed, merely becoming more careful with phrasing while retaining the same animus as proved by her votes. His face grim, he introduced audio files and records to question her loyalty to the nation that harbored her, beginning with a discussion of her oath of office. He noted the oath requires defending the U.S. Constitution, not Somalia, then played a recording from 2023 where she declared herself Somali first, Muslim second, and American third. Shapiro paused the audio to emphasize these were her own words, placing her obligation to the Constitution in a distant third place behind her other identities. He matched her words to her actions, showing she consistently sided with Somalia against U.S. allies like Ethiopia and Kenya in every vote involving the Horn of Africa. She opposed sanctions on corrupt Somali officials and voted against military action against al-Shabaab, consistently siding with Somalia against American interests. Shapiro revealed records of her meeting with Somali officials before U.S. delegations arrived, advocating positions aligned with that foreign government before receiving official briefings. He shifted to campaign finance, showing significant donations from individuals connected to the Somali government, establishing a pattern of money flowing in exchange for advocacy. He stared at her intensely, asserting that when interests conflict, her votes, statements, and meetings all prioritize Somalia, making her a representative for a foreign power. Omar claimed she represented her constituents, but Shapiro cut her off, reminding her they are Americans, and her oath is to America, not a split loyalty. He continued that America provided her safety, education, and power, and she repaid this by ranking the country third, which he termed a betrayal of trust. Shapiro then turned to the most offensive statement she had made, dropping his voice to discuss the attacks of September 11, 2001. He recalled the memory of nearly 3,000 murdered Americans, then played a clip of her describing the event merely as some people doing something. He analyzed the phrase word by word, contrasting her vague language about terrorists with her specific, passionate descriptions of tragedies like the Christchurch shooting. He noted she is capable of specificity when it suits her narrative, yet, for the worst attack in American history, she reduced the perpetrators to random people. Shapiro read statements from first responders who felt her comment minimized their sacrifice and letters from widows who felt the evil was not being named. He pointed out she made these comments at an event for CARE, an organization with documented ties to terrorism trials, choosing that venue to minimize the attacks. He argued she uses passive language for Muslim terrorists to avoid complicating her politics, swiftly pivoting to Muslim victimhood while families are still grieving. Shapiro then shifted from moral questions to intellectual ones, adopting a sharp academic tone to test her understanding of basic economics. He brought up the Amazon HQ2 deal she helped kill, asking her to define a tax incentive, then cutting her off to explain it to the audience. He used a diagram to show a tax incentive is a reduction in future payments, not a cash handout from existing government funds. Shapiro calculated the math on the screen, showing that without Amazon, the revenue is zero, but with the incentives, the government would still gain billions. He detailed that New York agreed to forego $3 billion to gain $4 billion in income taxes, plus additional corporate and sales taxes, totaling $8 billion in new revenue. She had claimed to save $3 billion, but he argued that money never existed, and her action actually cost the city $8 billion in lost potential revenue. He noted she killed 25,000 middle-class jobs because she mistook an incentive for a check written to Jeff Bezos, calling it dangerous economic illiteracy. Shapiro then displayed a wall of numbers to discuss her policy proposals, promising to explain their actual costs using real arithmetic. He showed that Medicare for All would cost $32 trillion, and the Green New Deal $93 trillion, totaling $125 trillion against a federal revenue of only $45 trillion. Even if every billionaire's wealth were confiscated and every corporation taxed at 100%, the government would still be $60 trillion short. He moved to the consequences, noting Medicare for All eliminates private insurance, and defunding the police in her own district led to a 40% increase in crime. He argued her open borders policy increases costs, while her free college proposal transfers wealth from the working class to the privileged. Shapiro faced her, stating her policies have massive costs, no funding, and disastrous outcomes, making them mathematically impossible fairy tales. Omar tried to argue for ambition, but Shapiro shouted that ambition cannot ignore arithmetic, and one cannot make trillions appear by magic. He stood up, gathering his documents into a pile, and began a rapid summary of her career, listing marriage fraud, family enrichment, and anti-Semitism. He listed her foreign loyalty, her minimization of 9/11, her economic illiteracy regarding Amazon, and her ethics violations, all delivered at maximum speed. He summarized that America gave her opportunity, and she responded with fraud, bigotry, and betrayal, weaponizing identity to shield herself from accountability. Shapiro looked at the camera, stating facts do not care about feelings or identity, and the data proves she squandered her advantages on destruction. The room sat in silence as Shapiro sat down, leaving Omar looking as if she had been struck by a high-speed intellectual train. The debate video garnered 150 million views in 3 days, with 73% of viewers believing Shapiro won decisively, including many Democrats. Investigations by the Ethics Committee and FBI followed. A primary challenger emerged, and 6 months later, Omar lost her seat by 23 points. Shapiro had dismantled a political figure with evidence at a pace that made interruption impossible, causing the video to go viral immediately. Polls showed even liberals admitted his facts were stronger than her emotions, and attempts to criticize his speed failed because his claims were documented. In her district, constituents protested, demanding answers about the money and loyalty, leading to a collapse in her approval ratings. Her squad members remained silent. Her speaking engagements vanished, and her husband's firm shut down once the overpayments became public knowledge. In her concession speech, she blamed racism, but Shapiro simply remarked on his podcast that her own conduct, not him, had ended her career.